Thank you very much. Cards on the table, though. I didn't quite hear the instruction to only put half of the alcohol in, so I've got a pretty potent drink going on there. So, but yeah, so first of all, my name's Nick Griffith. So as Dave mentioned, I'm part of the professional services team here at Bytes. So my kind of role is generally the designing, the implementing, and the actual, full kind of spectrum of deploying into cloud. Okay, primarily I started my life as a purely on-premise based setup, but as we've kind of migrated away from just being purely on-premise, that in itself is kind of realized itself in a kind of hybrid approach. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demo for you. So my entire session is going to be demo based. So live by the sword, die by the sword. So stay with me. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. So let's make sure that I share the right one. There we go. No, I appear to have shared everybody. Okay. Okay.
I think you're okay, Nick. We can just see your blue window. We're good. We can just see the blue screen with the two putty windows.
Great stuff. No worries. I originally had everybody on there, and I thought I was broadcasting in a big loop. Okay, so checkpoint. Okay, so like I said, I've looked through the attendee list, and I've dealt with a handful of you in in various guises, some of which have been cloud-based. But what is my job here today? My job is to try and kind of illustrate to you really. Firstly, the ease at which we can deploy into the cloud, but my concentration today is going to be primarily around what the checkpoint is capable of doing. Okay, big kind of concerns that I get from most customers when we first engage with them are that what's it going to do to my security posture? How secure actually is the cloud? Okay, the reality is, and I'm going to demonstrate it and provide the evidence for you today, is that actually, what you do on-prem as existing checkpoint customers actually is no different to what can be done in the cloud. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing. My lab that I've built for you, and this is the world's worst diagram, but it gets the point across. What I've got for you is an on-prem solution. So the blue square down at the bottom, I've got two zones, a DMZ zone and an internal zone. Okay, for the I will go into what the zones themselves are, but for kind of high level observation, it's two separate subnets. Okay, protected by a single checkpoint single checkpoint gateway. Up in AWS, so AWS is what we're using today. I've got a VPC. I've got a checkpoint CloudGuard cluster running, and in the back end, I have three private subnets. Okay, so I've got a development subnet, a production subnet, and a clients subnet. In each of the subnets, I've got a single Linux instance. So I've got a single Linux instance running in dev and prod, and I've got a Windows client, or certainly a Microsoft client based in the clients subnet. And on-prem, I've got a domain controller. So I have an entire corporation or enterprise domain built for this lab. And I've got my checkpoint management, and I've got a Windows 10 client that is domain joined as well. Okay, so it kind of really shows you the, what I can do across both an on-prem and a cloud-based setup. Okay, so now that I've shown you the terrible diagram, let's actually drill down into what that looks like as a solution for you as a checkpoint customer. Okay, now the vast majority of you who've used checkpoint before will be used to this by now. This is the R80 interface. It came out a few years ago now. So this is a central control mechanism for the entire of your checkpoint estate. Okay, so the fact that I've got on-premise cloud checkpoint devices, and the fact that I've got AWS instances as well makes not a jot of difference to what we're doing from a security standpoint. Okay, it's all controlled via the same central utility, so you're not having to find somebody else or recruit a new techie to look after a purely cloud-based solution. Actually, the training burden required to develop a cloud infrastructure is really no different from the way that you currently manage your checkpoint estate anyway. I'm running the vast majority of the blades. For those not familiar with the term blade in checkpoint terms, it's a feature. Okay, so that could be IPS, it could be antivirus. I am for my demo purposes running the full NGTP plus Sandblast Blade suite. Okay, so this is all of the functionality that Checkpoint can offer from a from a Checkpoint standpoint. Goes above and beyond what a cloud native solution could potentially offer you. So if you were to spin up in an AWS, what you've got there as a free offering, I suppose, is really you're looking at no more than another layer 4 instance, and the same in Azure as well. You're looking at NSGs, which is no more than layer 4. Whereas what we're doing here with Checkpoint is actually looking at the full stack. So this is the Checkpoint Management Console, like I said, and having a quick look now at what I'm got in the security policies. Now, I mentioned zones earlier. Okay, so this is a concept that actually a reasonable number of people have adopted now from the old R77 previous days. Okay, so from now, what we're looking at doing here is my security policy there has got 3 rules effectively. Okay, these are my parent rules, and I've designated them external, internal, and DMZ. Okay, so there's no great prizes here for guessing what the functions are, but let's have a quick look at what that looks like from my Checkpoint perspective. Okay, so I've got 3 zones: external, internal, and DMZ, and all they are is a logical representation of an area or an interface that the Checkpoint is connected to. Okay, so this is my on-prem gateway, and if I quickly dive into the 3 interfaces that I've got here, I've got an external interface here, and the designation from a Checkpoint perspective is external zone. Okay, so there we go. That is how I've tagged that interface. Same again on my internal side. I've got the internal tagging on that interface. And what I've done is actually in the AWS CloudGuard, I've done exactly the same. So whether or not I've got something coming in from the internet to my CloudGuard instances on-prem or in AWS, actually the zoning will take care of that for me. So I don't have to start having separate policies for separate gateways. I can actually share out, and I can have a fairly unified policy that controls my entire estate. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. Okay, I've got one policy, a global policy, and this is going to apply across both my on-prem Checkpoint and my AWS CloudGuard as well. Okay, now what I want to very quickly show you before I dig into the policy configuration. Okay, I'm going to jump onto my my Windows 10 on-premise clients now. Okay, so oops, I always type in a password under pressure. There you go. Okay, so this is a demo user. It's a domain join machine. It's a basic domain user with no additional privileges. Okay, I'm going to take a punt with the new Microsoft Edge browser, and I'm going to run what's called a CP check me. Okay, so this is a utility that Checkpoint provide, but what it's actually doing is it's checking the functionality of all of the blades that I've got configured on my CloudGuard. Okay, I'm going to run that now. That's going to work its way through that list of exploit tests. Okay, so it's checking for things like malware, it's checking for things like anti-bot, and it's checking for 0-day exploits and anonymizers and all of the stuff that you would expect a full next gen security setup to be able to detect and prevent. Okay, it's done, it works. There's nothing really there to show you other than the fact that the security itself is already in place out of the box. Okay, I've done nothing particularly special with that security policy. That has just been applied, and I'm just going to quickly sanity check that as well by running this on my session that I've got here. So this is in AWS now. So this is a Windows server that I've got spun up in AWS, and I'm going to run the same CP check me exercise. Okay. Same policy, same profile, same threat prevention profile that I've applied on my other gateways. And all I've done is literally add in this new gateway to my global policy. And I'm applying the same security posture without having to actually do a huge amount of work, really. Point to note really here is that I'm running HTTPS inspection as well. Now, for those of you who don't run HTTPS inspection, I sit down with customers quite regularly and have this conversation. I'm not going to say argument. It's a conversation around, you've got 70 to 80% of your outbound traffic here that is being, encrypted with TLS. If you're not inspecting that at either the gateway level or at the endpoint level or at the proxy level, you're missing a huge chunk of potential threat exploits there going through your gateway. Okay, so I'm running HTTPS inspection because it's being centrally managed, again, via via the checkpoint management console. It's the same certificate authority. Okay, so I haven't had to, create a new certificate for a new gateway instance and redeploy that to all of those gateways. This is all kind of being done by the fact that it is a centrally managed setup, single pane of glass, everything in one place. It is a really simple, straightforward solution to look at. So this is the policy, and these are the sub layers. Okay, so now that I've got internal out, so this is outbound traffic, this is where I can start looking at potentially becoming more granular with what I'm trying to achieve. So what I've done is I've set up a handful of rules in order to demonstrate some of the functionality that you can actually do with Checkpoint. Okay, so if you'll look here, rule 7.1, this is the first dropping off point, if you like, of my inline layer. So once something has matched my parent layer, I'm going to drop down into 7.1. And you'll see this kind of odd looking icon that you might not have seen before. This is called an access role. Okay, and what I'm doing here, this access role is actually utilizing a domain or an Active Directory security group. Okay, so I'm using a specific security group that allows a subset of users to do something. Okay, so if you are a member of that group, you will apply to this access role, and then depending on what you've got set up for that particular rule, is what access you will have granted to you. Okay, so for this example, what I've got is anyone who is a member of the Allow Gambling security group, you can go to a gambling category. Now, just to show what a normal user would do, let's quickly log on to here and quickly go to williamhill.com. Okay, I'm getting a page blocked. So this is a typical web proxy type setup. I'm enforcing a corporate strategy across my entire estate, but I'm actually going to use the access control list, or sorry, use the access role here to create an exception to that based on who somebody is. Okay, so anybody who's a member of that group, and I've pre-logged on to my RDP session in AWS with a user called Demo Finance. Now that Demo Finance user is part of that group. And what I want to show is that he is allowed to go to williamhill.com. Okay, so I have invoked that user's identity rather than relying on perhaps a static object that we would traditionally have created in the old days of firewalling. And the point really I've got to try and prove or show here or illustrate really is that regardless of whether that user, let's call him Bob, regardless of whether he's coming in via the on-prem CloudGuard, whether he's coming in via the AWS CloudGuard, or even if he's coming in via a remote access solution. Because we're relying on his identity rather than a static object, it means we can certainly be a lot more flexible and a lot more broad with our security policies. So, the days of Bob coming in on a Monday morning, sitting at a desktop, doing the same thing over and over again, going home, coming back in the next day, rinse, repeat. Those days really are kind of gone now, especially in 2020 as well. So the ability to leverage an identity is far more powerful than using a traditional firewall setup. So that's a user identity, and you've got we can use that across the entire corporation. So I'm using an AD query for both my AWS and my on-prem solution. Okay, now that's all well and good, but let's think about some other scenarios that we've got. Okay, we've deployed a cluster into AWS, and we have a whole host of stuff. Okay, it might not always be about a user's identity. Okay, it could be about a business function or something along those lines. That we want to make those policy decisions on. Okay, so let's take a look at what we can do with the CloudGuard controller and an AWS account. Okay, so I have got an AWS account, and I have got what is effectively an API. Okay, so this API is going to interrogate that AWS account. In my case, I've just named it AWS Data Center because I don't have a huge amount in there. But if you take a look at what I'm doing now, actually what I've got here is an API that's just called out to my AWS account, and I've got all of the objects, all of the tags, all of the instances, all of the EC2 objects, subnets, etc., all there in front of me to be able to use within my security policy. Okay. For simplicity's sake, I've got a couple of tags here that I'm going to use for demo purposes. I've got a development tag, and I've got a production tag. Okay. Now, I'll show you what those tags look like on the AWS console in a minute. But the point is, there are a couple of machines that I've got there that have got, one has a production tag, one has a development tag. Okay, my rule here says anything in the development tag is not able to go out via SSH. Anything with a production tag is allowed to go out via SSH. So a couple of servers here running in AWS, a couple of fairly standard bland EC2 instances. So on my production server, if I try and go to ftp.checkpoint.com via SSH, I am allowed out. Okay, I make a connection with the remote end. Okay, and if I try and make a connection out to ftp.checkpoint.com via SSH on my development server, okay, I get an error. Okay, connection reset by peer. The reality is it hasn't been reset by the peer, it's been intercepted in the middle, and the actual CloudGuard gateway has made that decision for me. So let's go and take a quick look at what that looks like on the checkpoint side of things. Okay, so let's nip into the logs. I have a couple of log filters running at the moment. So if I refresh my SSH, I'm just doing a keyword search, okay? You can see here that my AWS web server prod has been allowed out, nice green tick, and my AWS web server dev has not been allowed out. Okay, so let's just quickly dive into there and have a quick look at what that looks like from a log perspective. You can see here that I've got this, for most people that might be garbage, but that is actually the reference to the EC2 instance in AWS. Okay, most importantly, actually, you've actually got the tag here displayed for me. Okay, so I can see the logic as to why it's being blocked. Okay, even easier, I go to the matched rules and I can see, okay, it's hit rule 7. It's dropped into rule 7.4, and the reason it's been blocked is because it's hit 7.4, which says no SSH access outbound for that particular tag. Now, if I go into my AWS console, which I shall drag over here now, okay, these are the instances of interest for me. This is my development server. Okay, so that's CCB1. Make a mental note if you like of that. I'm going to go and change that tag now. Okay, so all I'm going to be doing is going to x-production.tag. Okay, I've picked these just because it makes things nice and easier. The reality is your AWS tagging and your cloud tagging is likely to be far more advanced than this. So you're going to have a whole subset of bits and pieces to be working with. Okay, now that I have refreshed that, you can see that it's now changed to a production tag, CCB1. So let's go and see what that looks like from the checkpoint perspective. Okay, so I have another search here running, interrogating just the identity awareness blade. Okay, so if I press refresh, yes, what I can see is that there's actually been a login event. Okay, well, two things actually. One is a logout event. So my CCB1 has actually changed that tag. So the API within the checkpoint management server has noted that the tag has been changed on that instance and has actually generated a log off and a log on event with the new tag. So now that my server has this X production tag associated with it, what I should notice now is that if I hop onto my production server, that should still work as advertised. It does. And when I log on to my development server and retry my checkpoint SSH session, you can see I've actually made a valid connection. What have I done at the checkpoint level though? I've actually done nothing whatsoever. Okay, so I've not had to rely on Bob being around at his desk to be able to make a a firewall change on a whim for me. I've actually just, firewalling isn't like that anymore. Okay, DevOps environments are so fluidly changing that actually those changes can be implemented, or a new security structure can be built around AWS tagging or Azure tagging or any of the cloud vendors tagging for that matter. And a move from one logical business function to another logical business function can be performed without having to actually manually change anything on that AWS, or sorry, on the checkpoint management side of things. Okay, so I think that really probably shows the the value and the additional functionality that you can get in AWS or with any cloud platform for that matter. So let's take a quick look then at what else I can do with tags. Okay, so I have got another rule underneath here, which says, okay, anyone in a development tag is unable to go to the Bytes website. Okay, anyone in the I should rename that. Anyone in the production tag can go to the Bytes website. So what I'll do, log on to my my Windows-based function this time. Okay, so I'm not leveraging any Linux-based functionality. I'm going to be leveraging a Windows machine this time. So if I go to www.bytes.co.uk, okay, I'm getting a prompt here that's telling me this is a development machine. Okay, and it's doing it based on the tag that the AWS instance has been assigned to it. Okay, so from a user perspective, it's clear at this point that the reason that they've been blocked, okay, so there are associated AWS tags that have detected this machine as development, okay, and the user is there, and the URL that they were trying to get to is there, and the category is there, okay. Now, again, all I would need to do is log on to my development tag, sorry, my Windows instance, which is what this is, okay. I'm going to nip onto here and I'm going to change that to production-tag. Click save. Okay, so that will now refresh. Okay, and I have a production tag associated with it. I'm going to give that a little second, but what will have happened in the background now is that the API again from Checkpoint will have called out to AWS, and actually what will happen in the background is that a different security policy effectively, or a different security rule, will now be applied based on the actual tagging within AWS. Okay, so let me just quickly minimize that. Let's reopen again my AWS client. Okay, this sometimes takes a little bit of time, but what I'll do is go to www.bytes.co.uk. Okay, and now I can see that the policy has changed, and I can now get to the Bytes website. Okay, so very, very simple, very, very straightforward, and I've not had to do anything at the checkpoint level. Okay, so I'm not. You're not relying on traditional firewalling in terms of being able to actually deal with this. Okay, we're leveraging additional things on top of what firewalls used to be able to do. Okay, so let me just nip back to the checkpoint side of things now as well. So back onto the Checkpoint website. I've talked really about outbound services, and you know what, the methodology used for inbound services at all actually is exactly the same. Okay, if you've got a scenario where you've got a web server that's under load or whatever kind of scenario you've got, and you want to spin up a new web server to add to that backend pool, for example, it's fairly straightforward. All you've got to do is rely on your AWS tagging, and just by spinning up that instance with the appropriate tag, you're actually going to invoke that security policy that is being deployed on part of this gateway without having to, go here, create new host, add an IP address, push policy. That's old school firewalling. Okay, there's no requirement for that to be the only way that you can do things nowadays. Okay. Deploying into the cloud itself is really, really straightforward. Okay. Once it is there, I keep reiterating the point, but you would actually just manage this in exactly the same way that you would do for any other checkpoint instance. Okay. Once you've got it out there, because we're relying on central management, you've actually, and I would probably suggest that if you don't have Smart Event, you really should have Smart Event. Smart Event is, the Checkpoint's proprietary SIM solution. So if you've got, logs coming in from an AWS instance, if you've got logs coming in from a GCP instance, logs coming in from any of the other cloud-based instances into your central management solution, what you really need now is something to be able to correlate those individual log files, create some actual trend analysis, or if you want to dumb it down a little bit, some pretty graphs and pie charts to look at. Okay, so this is where Smart Event really kind of comes into its own in being able to build up that security picture, and then once you've got that in place, you can actually start utilizing that as part of your business culture. So I tend to work with customers, trying to build in on perhaps on either pre-cab or post-cab, building in some of these generated reports and part of that process. So you're actually taking security seriously and sitting down and discussing it openly as part of the business. So that's kind of where Smart Event really comes in into that. So these are all generated reports. They're all predefined. Nothing here is I've gone to any lengths whatsoever to generate. These are all here out of the box as a genuine as a report that you can use as part of your business processes, really. So that is the Checkpoint Smart Event solution. Now, I suppose really it's more at this point possibly discussing around about where we might come in, or where my kind of real world experience with customers is. So a lot of it that I'm getting conversations about now are, if you've got a really expensive colo location somewhere in central London, you're trying to revisit what you're going to be doing as a DR solution, for example. Okay. There is absolutely nothing wrong, and there's no problem or no issues in deploying a CloudGuard solution and actually using that as a genuine DR solution. So what I just want to briefly touch on something else as well. So the connectivity that I've got between the two sites, for my lab purposes, I've got a site-to-site VPN, okay, between my on-prem and my cloud, and all of the connectivity, so all of my domain kind of communication is running through that VPN tunnel. In AWS, you might have a slightly more in-depth communication channel, so you might have a direct connect, for example. In Azure, you might have an express route communication. These are the kind of first steps that I've seen customers have into going into the cloud. Okay, spinning up an instance in Azure or in AWS, it takes very little time at all. Okay, I can spin up with a customer within a morning, get a cluster up running. With some test traffic running through it, with a VPN back to on-premise, just so they can get a feel of what it can actually do from a day-to-day management perspective. And actually, as they often tell me, it's once it's there, it is literally just a simple case of managing that checkpoint estate in exactly the same way as they do for their on-premise. So that's what I'm kind of seeing at the moment with my discussions and the projects I'm involved with customers is that kind of almost first steps, if you like. On the flip side of that, if you've got an actual genuinely mature cloud environment that is only being protected, for example, via an Azure firewall or an AWS type firewall, I've also worked with customers to actually introduce a CloudGuard security product to be the front end of that security, your security cloud posture. Because, like I keep saying with most customers, is the last thing that they want to end up doing is becoming, the next big story on the BBC website. It's about securing that, from the off, and getting that CloudGuard, getting that full layer 7 security posture in place, into that cloud environment, and it can adapt. Okay, it's a it's a different environment, the cloud, and these are the kind of things that Alan and Simon will be talking about shortly. So I don't want to try to tread on their toes. But AWS and Azure cloud-based environments are different. You don't generally just have a couple of servers doing something. You have a constantly scaling environment that needs to adapt, and because that's constantly changing, you need a security product that can actually adapt with it. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit later on when I have a chat with Alan, answering some of his challenges about some of the scaling type scenarios that we have, or we can certainly run with Checkpoint, and that'll be quite important as well in the in the whole CloudGuard big picture question. That's pretty much it from a demo standpoint. So I'm more than happy to take questions via the chat. If I don't know the answer today, I'll certainly get back to you with a concrete answer at some point in time. But let me just stop sharing my screen for the time being, and I know that I can hand over to the.
So thanks everybody. Hopefully you're all enjoying the drinks. As we get later towards the end of the presentations, I'm conscious that no one really cares what we're saying. Luckily I've been pacing myself. I'm doing half measures, so hopefully I'm still relatively coherent. So I'm basically going to do a bit about the Amazon practice. We talk a lot about our Microsoft prowess, and we do a lot in that space around professional services and migrations, and obviously when we're talking about Checkpoint, we can support in that area as well. But one of the things we do overlook, it's our youngest probably part of the business in terms of it's only been running really for about 2.5 years compared to the 20+ years that the Microsoft business has been running. But we've got quite a lot to shout about, and I think it's worth saying Amazon have taken a really aggressive attitude to helping customers migrate. So I'm going to give a bit of an insight into some of the programs that are available to you if you are looking at AWS particularly. There's some great funding out there. So just as a quick overview of who we are. So we're an advanced consultancy partner, essentially means that we've been authorized by Amazon to do various migration, security work, well-architected reviews. We've got a whole host of different competencies now that essentially gives us access to funding programs for our customers. Over the last 12 months to 18 months, which is really when we got going on the Amazon side, we've managed to build up a book of 100 managed service customers. So we're doing their billing, cost optimization, security, sometimes DevOps management, proactive monitoring 24/7. Different customers have different services from us. We're actually billing well over $2 million a month, and that grows on a monthly basis. Carried out hundreds of migrations. One of the interesting points for you guys and your businesses, so far in the last probably this 19, I think just coming up to the end of the financial year of Amazon now, we've managed to achieve around $500,000 of funding, which, looking at the pipeline of funding that we're looking to get for other customers, is going to be dwarfed. We've got $2.8 million of funding over the next 12 months for our customers, assuming they go ahead with the projects that we've put in front of them. So the funding at the moment that Amazon is throwing at customers to help them move to AWS is crazy in my opinion. Never seen anything like it, maybe back in the days of Microsoft, but right now it's a good time to be looking at potentially moving workloads into Amazon, and we're there to support you to do that. Just this week, or back end of last week, you may have seen it on LinkedIn, we won Partner of the Year as well, and we're probably one of the newest partners to actually be at the table to win a Partner of the Year award, and that was specifically for migrating Windows workloads into AWS. And also in the last 3 months, we got our digital workplace. We see a massive trend, as everyone does, people working from home. Amazon have a good mature offering around that with their app stream and workspaces. So we thought it important to make sure that we had the badge to help customers, and that gives us access to funding as well for people looking to do proof of concepts and looking at that type of technology. So how we built the practice, we went to Amazon 2.5 years ago and said, what do you need? we're a big organization in terms of resellers in the UK, and we've got lots of customers, really great customers. What's the best thing we can do? The first thing they said is, we've got a real issue with customers deploying AWS, but not putting control, governance, and security around AWS. So we built a business around cloud optimization, governance, and security. And that was our focus probably for the first 6 to 9 months, where we really looked at the cost operational excellence of what customers were doing. And we used a product called Cloud Health to do that. Cloud Health essentially is a cost optimization management tool for billing. It does have an element of security, checks in it, just pulling an API feed from AWS itself, and then just sticking it on a screen and giving you some remedial actions around it. But the core focus of it is driving down costs of customers, and customers had real issues in the early stages moving into the cloud with cloud kind of creep in terms of engineers and developers loving all the different stuff, but not really putting any control around it, i.e. tagging policies, spending alerts, budget alerts, and having that accountability. So we focused down on that and built up a book of customers. Quite quickly, those customers turned around and said, right, well, what else can you do? We need you to help us migrate these workloads. So we've kind of built out our practice on that. And we use typically Amazon native, but as this whole webinar is about, Amazon doesn't do everything, and they'll put their hands up to that. And there's other tooling out there that can do a much better job, particularly when we're talking about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud strategies, which we are increasingly seeing organizations have. So that's where the likes of Checkpoint come in. And we're a big advocate of making things easy. That is what our mantra is. Keep things simple, because it's not actually that simple when you look at the amount of services that are available in these clouds. So wherever we can create simplicity and reduce our customers' teams' workloads, then that's where our focus really is. Slide's not moving. Here we go. So just as a quick overview of the services that we offer now from the practice. So backup and DR, as you'd expect, organizations want to back up to AWS or do DR into AWS. There is actually a funding program around that, which I'll touch on later. The cost reduction and optimization is where we look at customers' costs and look to see how we can drive those costs down. We offer a free of charge snapshot, and then there's an ongoing service that Amazon actually fund on behalf of our customers. So they will actually pay us to help you save money, because they see that as an investment in the fact that the customers statistically who are saving money, have control of budgets, the finance teams know exactly what's being spent where, are more likely to sign off further projects. So it's not a selfless act, them funding us to do cost optimization services, but it does make sense for our customers. We also offer AWS support, 24/7 managed services. Security, obviously we mentioned. We also work with a company called Armor, which is a fully managed service with a SOC sitting at the end of it. Migrations is probably our bread and butter now. That's where the majority of our work goes. And then that normally falls into support once we've done the migration. As you move down the cycle within cloud, we look at refactoring, re-architecting. So that's modernization workloads, and there's further funding programs around that, which I'll cover off. So the first funding thing that we're seeing pretty much fly off the shelf at the moment, Amazon now will fund a migration assessment project. There is some caveats, minimum of 50 servers that we need to be analyzing, but we can get funding up to $10,000. So that pays for the tooling that we use, which would potentially be a Cloudamize type tool if you've come across that before, where we do an analysis of the on-premise or estate and see what's there. Then we look at right sizing it, and then looking at what it would potentially look like in AWS, and looking at what funding off the back of that would look like. So we're doing a lot of these at the moment, because a lot of customers are scratching their heads thinking about moving to the cloud, or potentially they've done a bit, but they've got all this other stuff that they might want to move across, but they haven't got the time or inclination to really work out exactly how much it's going to cost, or how much funding that's available to actually migrate that across. So this service really sets itself up for that. It's either agent or agentless based. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to roll it out. and it's essentially a 2-week, probably end-to-end project, which mostly is just the monitoring agents. Once that's done, we can give you an idea of what that might look like in AWS. It does a whole bunch of other stuff around application dependency mapping. So you might have a question about one particular application that you know is critical, but you haven't been involved in it. What does it access? So if you move that, what else has to move with it? Then we can get that kind of visibility as well. But typically we see this as the first step for organizations that are looking to potentially move to AWS. And again, it's fully funded, so there's no cost to the business itself. Another funded program for POCs for DR into AWS. So Amazon recently bought an organization called Cloud Endure. It's a piece of software, not dissimilar to Zerto or Veeam, if you're familiar with that. And they will fully fund the licenses. And there's an offer at the moment to fully fund the licenses for this product up until April next year, if it's signed before the end of the year. Plus, they will fund for the proof of concepts. That's looking at a subset of your architecture, look at deploying this service and getting it up and running for you. They pay for all of our consultancy to do that, so you can test it, make sure it's right for you. And then obviously, if you want to go ahead, we can continue rolling that out and take advantage of some of the other discounts on the licenses that are available at the moment. So again, if customers are looking at putting their toe in to this and think DR might be one of those first passes at it, then there's a funding program available for that. So in terms of the life cycle, and this is how we've almost designed our business when we're pitching to customers, the funding is at every typical stage. So the migration assessment, just covered off. POC funding for workloads. So we work with a lot of startup organizations or organizations that are developing a brand new technology or app to bring to market. We can typically get funding for the initial MVP build for that from Amazon. Migration funding is probably where the largest amount. So we're working with a large pub chain at the moment. It's going through all sorts of woes, as you can imagine, but they need to save some money, and we've done the migration assessment for them already, identified the fact that they can save circa 1.2 million a year by doing the migration, and then went to Amazon, and they've given us $500,000 to perform that migration. The actual migration cost is only about $300,000. So they've got another $200,000 to pay for direct connects or pay for a training for the teams. So basically what Amazon have done is just removed all blockers from the conversation of moving to the cloud for this particular customer. And we're seeing that time and time again, particularly in the public sector. This is resonating well with. We often do the cloud assessment, then present back our findings and the funding, and it's almost a stunned silence when we say, oh, by the way, the cost of migrating, it's going to be a 9-month project, but it's not actually going to cost you anything to do that, because Amazon's going to cover those costs on our behalf. And then they almost go, cool, can you go back? Can you go back? Well, no, that's what it is. They also offer a buyback program on all your existing hardware on premise. So for one particular council, we managed to achieve about £35,000 sterling, which was kit that it was just essentially just going to have to pay someone else to recycle for them. All of a sudden, they had enough money there to pay for their direct connect for 2 years. So yeah. Well, I guess the summary of it is Amazon's incredibly aggressive at the moment. So if you have got workloads that you are potentially moving to the cloud, definitely come and talk to us, contact your account manager, and we can kind of look at what options there are available, because they are pretty much every stage of the way, and some of the funding is completely uncapped as well. So the largest we've seen is about 1.2 million. We haven't moved ahead with that project, but that's on the table from Amazon to do a migration. It is obviously based on the size of the consumption when it's in the cloud, but it's pretty compelling when you look at at the whole picture, the TCO engagement, as it were. But even at a smaller scale, looking at POCs, MVPs, trialing it out. So if you have got your checkpoint estate in on-premise traditional architecture, but you are looking at going out into a cloud, pick a workload, we can look to extend the checkpoint and get checkpoint support on that. We can look at getting funding for the POC, so you can really feel comfortable with it before actually kind of taking the plunge. You may as well take advantage of it whilst it's there. We don't expect things to change into next year, but it is incredibly valuable to customers at this time. that's everything from me. So I think we've got questions at the end. So I'll stop sharing. I think I'm going to be handing over to Alan, one of our senior architects here.
Thanks very much, Simon. I just want to check that everyone can see my screen.
Yes, all good.
Great stuff. Yeah, so as Simon alluded to or stated, we've got a very large set of technical teams that work on all sorts of different professional services engagements, of which I'm one. I work on those professional services engagements for many different companies using many different cloud services. But whether it's for a very small business or a very large enterprise, every one of those projects has involved a significant element of security. And two key lessons that I've learned is that it's very important to have a clear security strategy, and equally important to have a powerful but easy to use set of security tools. The first is relatively easy to define, but the second can prove challenging, particularly when operating in a multi or hybrid environment. Over the next 10 minutes, I'd just like to talk about what I think are some of the current gaps in native cloud security services and some of the challenges that I've encountered personally when looking at third-party solutions to try and fill those gaps. So there are a lot of cloud services, a bewildering amount, you would say. And there are a lot of cloud services that are specifically focused on security. However, despite this, there are still some gaps in the portfolio, and I'd like to summarize a few of the most commonly encountered ones, which I've listed here. So, whilst many cloud providers have started to offer native intrusion detection or anomaly detection systems, for example, AWS Guard Duty and Azure Threat Protection, they fall short of offering a fully integrated and automated method of actually preventing the detected attacks. It's possible, with a fair bit of work, to create some prevention actions that are triggered by the detection alerts that are coming out of those systems, but it's still a long way from the kind of fully automated protection offered by true IPS systems. Most cloud providers offer a layer 3 or layer 4 stateful firewall, such as AWS security groups and Azure network security groups, which are basically a simple black or white list of IP addresses and ports. Many also offer web application firewalls and DDoS protection, like AWS WAF and Shield, and the Azure DDoS protection services. Although the packet inspection that they provide is inbound only, and the advanced DDoS protection services are usually only available at a premium of a few $1,000s every month. But this still does leave big gaps for things like non-web protocol application layer protection, deep packet inspection of outbound traffic, and things like bot detection, web filtering, and network-based anti-malware scanning. Moving on, in the right mood, and if it's a really intriguing technical problem, the most geeky geeks might admit to sometimes enjoying looking through audit trail, network packet tracing, and security system logs to try and work out why something isn't working. But add to this the pressure of needing to find and fix an issue very quickly because their employer is losing revenue and or reputation. And they'll soon admit that they'd much rather just have an intuitive and visual interface that allows them to find and see what they need without having to go digging for it. Due to the combination of the fact that in the cloud, a lot of the underlying infrastructure is hidden from you, and that there's no native way of easily analyzing and visualizing operations, this is unfortunately what they end up having to do. Related to this is the missing ability to visualize the cloud infrastructure and your workloads running in the cloud and their dependencies. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I would completely agree with that. As a techie, I can wholeheartedly say that if I have a clear an accurate set of topology diagrams, then I'm able to understand and fix issues a lot more effectively. There are a couple of new native features that give a limited visualization of a component of the cloud environment, but sadly, there's nothing right now that gives a more comprehensive view. So modern day cloud environments are often built and managed as code and utilize serverless technologies such as AWS Lambda functions and Azure functions. However, there is still no fully integrated native way to perform vulnerability and compliance analysis of the code before deployment and runtime, which means that companies often have to put the code into production, or at least put it into a live dev and test environment before they can get to scan and detect those issues. I'm happy to say that the cloud providers are working on services that are looking to address this, such as AWS's new CloudFormation Guard service, which was released in the last few weeks, but there's still quite a way to go yet. In terms of data loss prevention, all of the major public cloud providers have services that aid in DLP by scanning and classifying data and looking at some of the security controls that have been configured on the storage containers of that data. However, they're focused on stored data only, meaning that there's still a gap in terms of detection and prevention of the leaking data as it actually leaves the network. With regards to antivirus and anti-malware protection, there's some disparity between the cloud providers on this one. Azure is the front runner with their Microsoft anti-malware service, due in very large part, I think, because of Microsoft's background in client and server operating systems. The other cloud providers have yet to venture into the field, leaving this entirely to third parties. A typical cloud environment will contain hundreds or often thousands of security groups of layer 4 firewalls, effectively, and also several web application firewalls. But there's no way to centrally manage all of them and ensure that they all adhere to the corporate security policies. Cloud providers recognize this issue and are releasing services like the AWS Firewall Manager service to try and address it, but the functionality is still rudimentary and it's not particularly user-friendly, if I'm honest. Finally, even if, or perhaps when, all of the gaps that I've just mentioned have been filled, for companies operating a hybrid or multi-cloud environment that are utilizing native security services, there will still remain one key gap, because the services of each cloud provider will relate primarily or potentially entirely to securing workloads within their own particular platform, meaning that these companies will need to use a different set of tools and maintain a different set of processes for each cloud that they're using. So there are certainly some gaps in native cloud security offerings. And which of those gaps, if any, apply to you will depend on the requirements of each of your workloads. Thankfully, there are many security vendors out there who offer products and services aimed at bridging those gaps. However, the cloud readiness of some of them can be questionable because cloud technologies and the methods and expectations of those that use them present some unique challenges over the more traditional on-premise environments of the old days. And I've listed some of those just here. So one of the biggest attractions of the cloud is the ability to scale resources up and down automatically and at a fast pace in order to keep up with spikes in demand, but also to keep costs as low as possible during quiet periods. This doesn't just apply to the workloads themselves, but also to the security services that protect them. Maintaining a static, highly spec'd and expensive security appliance cluster doesn't really fit with that kind of dynamic and cost-efficient environment and methodology, if you like. So This kind of dynamic environment also presents a challenge for security services, because the things that they're trying to protect keep changing, often on a minutely basis, which means that security policies often need to be overly permissive in order to allow for the size and scope of the environment at its maximum peak, even after it's long since scaled back to minimal resources once the load has decreased. So DevOps and DevSecOps are very prevalent across the industry now. And many enterprises now want to deploy and manage their cloud infrastructure as code, and won't want to have to provision traditional security products, appliances or services through a separate, more manual process. They also want to evolve the coded infrastructure through a development and test lifecycle pipeline, and don't want to have to worry about adjusting security policies and other products outside of this pipeline. And keeping with that DevOps theme, they often want the ability to interact with the services that make up their cloud estate through an API in order to continue that drive to automation. Cloud providers release new services and features all the time. You saw from that list earlier of the hundreds of services that currently exist, and that changes on a weekly basis. From a network perspective, things like AWS's Transit Gateway service make it really easy to centralize the management of network routing and VPN termination. Often third-party network and security services require the creation of an overlay network in order to route the traffic through their products for inspection, which can interfere or sometimes rule out entirely the use of those cloud services. So that becomes another challenge for the third-party software vendors. So as I mentioned earlier, native centralized management of security policy within a cloud environment is still in its infancy and needs to be done through a particular cloud security console in each individual cloud account or subscription, and usually in the particular region that hosts the resources. And that can increase operational complexity, but also decreases administrative efficiency. This diverse distribution of infrastructure also presents challenges to third-party security vendors. Taking this a little further, we're often not just talking about the distribution of infrastructure across the world within one cloud provider, but also across multiple cloud providers and also some on-premise data centers. Finally, the cloud doesn't just offer technical flexibility, it also offers financial flexibility. Many non-cloud vendors tend to have a less flexible model and expect the purchase of licenses up front and for a particular minimum period, which may not work for some companies, particularly companies that are embracing the cloud methodologies. So that was my summary of what I see as the current gaps in native cloud security services, and also some of the challenges that I've encountered when trying to fill them with third-party products. I was glad to see from Nick's demo that it looks like Checkpoint are actively trying to address some of these, which is great. So I'll be interested to hear a little more from him about some of those specific points that I mentioned. So with that, I'll hand back over to you, Nick, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks,
How much have you been drinking? Are you still?
I'm still one drink behind.
Getting lower in the seats as the. That's not my presentation.
Thanks, Alan. If you could leave that third-party slide up, that's actually quite useful for me, because then I can start kind of address them. The one thing I didn't really touch on actually when I was going through my demo was the scaling side of things. Okay, so we're concentrating on AWS for this webinar. Okay, so what we're looking at really there is an auto scaling group. Okay, so Checkpoint has the ability to deploy as an auto scaling group. You know, the kind of things that it caters for, I suppose, are let's take a retail, customer who has seasonal differences. Okay, so coming up to the Christmas period, and in a normal year, we'd be looking at ramping up, business at the moment. So their online business, the next sale, let's take that as an example. Okay, coming up to the next sale, around about Christmas time, you're going to be looking at having to spin up resources in order to be able to accommodate that extra demand. So what we do with an AWS, auto scaling group, which is what Checkpoint can deploy as, what we'd look at is actually, if we notice that the checkpoint is running at say a 60% load over a period of a certain amount of time, what would actually happen is that our cluster of 2 would actually spin up a third instance. Okay, so now we've got a cluster of 3 to be able to accommodate that additional load that's been brought in. So you define this, and you define a minimum number, and you define a maximum number that you're looking to scale out to. And again, what will happen is, because Checkpoint have got what's called a cloud management extension, which is effectively the ability to ingest that additional cluster member without having to do anything, and it brings it on board to the management, and it automatically pushes that policy. It scales your security bandwidth, if you like, into an additional third member, basically. And then once you've got over the hump, so to speak, what will happen is that it will, based on your kind of metrics, once the load reduces and it stays at that particularly reduced rate for a period of time, what will happen is it will just scale back in. Okay, so it scales, and it copes far better than perhaps having a conversation with a customer about saying, yeah, sorry, Mr. Customer, I know you've got some challenges, but you're going to have to buy a bigger firewall. Those kind of things don't tend to fly nowadays in the environment that we're working in. So certainly scaling isn't a particular challenge for CloudGuard, and it's certainly built into the auto scaling groups that we can deploy into. The dynamically changing element, I suppose I probably covered that off a little bit with some of the tagging. So if you're moving, you have a lot of product lifecycle where you've deployed into development, you want to run some feature sets on it, and then you want to productionize that particular workflow. The use of tagging, certainly helps that particular challenge. Okay, so because you're not having to rely on somebody having to create a static object, or if you're working at scale, having to create 30 or 40 new web servers just to be able to get that functionality. That isn't required anymore. The DevSecOps thing. Now, I suppose what we're talking about here, it's multiple things. Okay, so we've got a handful of customers that can deploy via Terraform. In Azure, you can deploy, via PowerShell templates. Checkpoint are very good at offering up their code via GitHub. So if you go onto the Checkpoint repository on GitHub, you'll be able to find the templates that are normally deployed via the marketplace, and you can customize them, and tweak them to your kind of environment, really. The API driven thing now. Actually, if you can stop sharing for a second, Alan, what I will briefly do is share my screen.
No worries.
And
all yours.
Thank you. Okay, so if I bring that across there, learn how to use Zoom. You'd think I'd figured it out by now, wouldn't you? To share. Okay, move that across there. Close enough. Okay. The API side of things. Okay, Checkpoint as of R80, effectively when they rewrote the code from the bottom, opened up their API to be able to be a far more kind of DevOps, DevSecOps driven product. Okay, so anything that you can do, generally in the Smart Console GUI, there is an API available for it. Okay, so it's very granular, it's very thorough. I'd struggle really to think of a scenario at the moment that you couldn't do via an API, something that you would normally do via an on-premise workload. The Other elements, I've lost the slide now, so I've got no idea what it was saying. But I suppose what we're looking at is the ability for it to scale, ability for it to be able to manage across, perhaps across multi-firewalls, multi-availability zone, multi-region, and in particular multi-cloud. Okay, so certainly multi-cloud is one of the things it's capable of doing. Okay, so we've got customers who run both an AWS environment for their development side of things.
I've unmuted myself now, haven't I?
Yeah, we can see you. We can hear you and see you.
Can you see me? Oh right.
Oh, it's back.
Look.
Hello. Sorry.
I muted them. It's fine, Nick. It's done.
I was like, am I hearing voices again? Is it? I'm only one drinking. Yeah, so the ability for it to work across availability zones. We've got customers who run, AWS and Azure and GCP, and I've got customers that run across, maybe 5 different cloud vendors. So yeah, Checkpoint certainly helps out in that respect. And down to the licensing, okay, the commercials again. Yeah, Checkpoint effectively has two kind of options really. You can purchase what's effectively a number of virtual cores. Okay, they are cloud platform agnostic. Okay, so let's just say you bought 50 virtual cores. You can spread those out across all of the cloud platforms that you happen to want to deploy into, if you've got the ability, that is, to kind of look into the future and say you're going to need X amount of cores for your environment. Or you can traditionally just deploy via the marketplace on a pay-as-you-go basis. From a central management perspective, it makes no difference what it looks like. Okay, you're still enforcing that same security subset that I talked about previously, all done centrally. And yeah, one other brief thing I'll just very quickly show you from an AWS standpoint. Okay, so back onto screen 2 again. Let me get rid of here. These are examples of the AWS CloudFormation templates that you can deploy. So we talked about cross availability zone cluster. Okay, so this is deploying with a you've got the ability to deploy either single instance gateways, very, very simple setup. A lot of customers will do that as a test, but then you've got the more complex you get from an enterprise level. You've got the ability to auto scale. You've got the ability to deploy as part of with a transit gateway as well. So if you've got all of these disparate randomly dumped cloud objects that you want to start actually bringing together for your central comms flow, you can certainly do that from a Checkpoint perspective as well. So I think I suppose the answer that we're looking really to get from this is yes, Checkpoint certainly is a particularly strong product in serving those gaps that are perhaps not served by a cloud native solution. But I think that's pretty much it. And the good news is, A, we're on time, which no one cares about, but B, I think it's drink number 3. So I'm good for that.
Sure is.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, how's it been doing?
Very well.
Are we
thank
thirsty
you.
yet?